Good afternoon, Bermuda. I'm joined by the Assistant Police Commissioner, Martin Weeks. I wanted to have this briefing today because we've seen in recent weeks and days that there's been an increase in the number of COVID cases here in Bermuda. As you can appreciate, this is a concerning time for our community, particularly when we see the alarming trend overseas with an explosion in rise of corona cases. And with the holidays fast approaching, we know that there will be a desire for many residents to gather together for the festive season. But we must remain vigilant. And while this would typically be a time when we would connect with our loved ones and our friends in close proximity, we must be mindful that these are not normal times that we are currently in. We are actually far from it. The truth is that we continue to be in the throes of a pandemic. And the increases in COVID cases here in Bermuda should be a reality check for all of us. So, today, Assistant Commissioner Weeks and I wanted to take a few moments to touch on some of the guidelines for large group gatherings and the approval process for such events. Additionally, the Assistant Police Commissioner wishes to highlight some of the steps that the Bermuda Police Service have taken and continue to take to enforce the COVID-19 regulations. This includes visits to various businesses, bars, and restaurants to ensure that patrons and establishments are engaging in the appropriate health and safety guidelines. As it relates to the approval process for groups and gatherings, the public should be aware that the exemption application process has been amended and the following will be in place. Due to the health and safety concerns, a decision has been made to reduce the group gathering size from 75 persons back to 50 persons. Application for an exemption must be made at least 10 working days in advance of the date of the event. Beginning next week, applicants can complete the exemption application form and review the guidelines and guidance at gov.bm. Applications will be reviewed, checked for compliance with the COVID-19 guidelines and protocols. Applications are submitted to the Minister of National Security for a final decision. As an added reminder, earlier this week, my colleague, the Minister of Health for Bermuda, outlined some critical amended regulations as it relates to mask wearing. And I think it is important to remind the public of these new guidelines. It is now an offense to not wear a mask in accordance with the guidelines. A person who fails to wear a mask when one is required commits an offense and is liable on summary conviction to a fine of $500 in respect of a first offense and a fine of $1,000 for a second or subsequent offense. We are encouraging everyone who sees any of these breaches of non-compliance of mask wearing to contact 211. Lastly, as I close, it bears repeating, COVID-19 remains among us, and I'm urging residents to exercise a degree of personal responsibility. In spite of the uptick in cases, Bermuda has generally managed this pandemic extremely well, thanks in large part to the health guidance and recommendations put in place. With the colder months now upon us, we're asking people to please continue to follow health guidelines to protect you and your families, especially during this holiday season. This includes wearing a mask, hand sanitizing, maintaining the appropriate physical distance. And finally, if you're in attendance at any establishment or location around the island and you see any violations of the COVID-19 regulations by persons or businesses, please do not hesitate to call 211 to report the violations. I now welcome the Assistant Commissioner Weeks to provide any additional commentary should he wish.
Thank you, Minister. Good afternoon, everybody. I've been invited to say a few things, and I just want to start by saying that as a member of the Public Health Emergency Response Team, I've heard firsthand from the Chief Medical Officer and health professionals about the situation we're in. And let's face it, it's a serious situation. So all of these new rules that the police will be out there enforcing, they're there for a reason. They're not there to mess with your constitutional rights. They're there to try and keep Bermuda healthy and trying to keep our people, particularly our vulnerable people, healthy. It might not be about you, it might be more about your grandparents and the people who, if it was turned around the other way, would be doing their absolute best to keep you safe. So to that end, I put together a COVID compliance team from the police, so we got some extra people just concentrating on COVID compliance. It's going to be a mixed group of police officers and reserve police officers, and they're out there now. They've been out all this week going to bars, restaurants and other licensed premises, doing compliance checking, making sure that everybody's doing what they need to do. And this is not about enforcement, which is about compliance. We want people to comply, so that's why we're out here telling you what it is we're going to do. So we're going to be out again all this weekend and throughout the week doing that, trying to get compliance, trying to make sure that everybody's doing what they're doing. We have some new powers now. The power is still there to close down premises for 24 hours, liquor license premises. And now only an inspector has to make that decision. It doesn't have to go up to a superintendent. There will be an inspector as part of this COVID compliance team, and he will be tasked with closing down premises who are not complying. So if you're a business owner, and I have to say that the business owners have been very cooperative, very happy to see the police officers coming in. We've had a lot of people asking those police officers for advice on how they can do better, and that's a really positive thing. The minister's just talked about the new regulations about mask wearing, and let's be clear, the police are going to be monitoring this, but what we're not going to be doing is zero tolerance. If you get out of your car and start walking towards the store, which we've all done, and suddenly realize, oh, I haven't got my mask, and you walk back to the car, no one is going to be jumping on you and giving you a fine. And I say that because there's already a voicemail out there saying that that's exactly what we're doing. In fact, I think they said we were doing it in the car park of the Heron Bay Marketplace. It is not true. That is not what we are doing. We will be policing this proportionately. We will be policing this fairly, the same way that we have throughout this COVID pandemic situation. We are not looking to criminalize people who are just going about their everyday business, but this is a serious issue, and we will be exercising the powers that have been granted us under this legislation to keep people safe. So this is all about keeping people safe. We urge everybody to do their bit, to be the capable guardian, to be the grown-up in the room and say to people, hey, put your mask on. Hey, stand a little bit further away. Sit down. You know, we're trying to keep people safe. We encourage everyone to be the police officer in this situation and to keep your friends, your loved ones safe. And if people aren't doing what they're supposed to do and you can't get them to do it, call the police non-emergency line, the 211 line. We will be adding extra personnel in peak periods to make sure that there's somebody to answer those phones. And we also have an online portal on the police website, police.bm, where you can also do it electronically if you want to tell us where there's a problem, where there are people who are clearly, blatantly not following these rules. We want to know, because we're going to get down there and sort that out. So thank you, Minister, for the chance to talk. Thank you to the public, because, as the Minister quite rightly pointed out, the reason we in Bermuda are in such great shape is because the public have been very, very cooperative, have worked with the police, have worked with the health department to keep infections down. Let's keep that up. We're going into Christmas now. We all want to get together with our families. We are going to have to do it a little differently this year, but please do it safely. Thank you.
Right. Mr. Media, I'd like to open it up for any queries that you may have for the Minister of Business and Police Commission.
Thank you both very much for the honouring worship from the Royal Gazette. Mr. Weeks, you talked about the police will be taking a zero tolerance approach. And that's exactly what we heard the Premier ask the police to do maybe 2 weeks ago, November 24th. So he said that he's asking you to take a zero tolerance approach, and you're saying that's not the case.
Well,
Can you just tell us
yes,
about
absolutely. We've had this conversation with the Premier, and there are different, what zero tolerance means in most people's heads is not necessarily the same as what it means in some other people's heads. And what we've said to the Premier is we absolutely understand the seriousness of the situation. We are absolutely going to work to do enforcement and compliance, and that's why we put this team together to just do what it was the Premier wants us to do, which is to make sure that we are doing our part to help alongside all the other agencies, and we don't want anybody to think that we are ignoring this. The Bermuda Police Service is very, very clear on what the Premier wants from us, and we're going to get that job done.
So what does that mean then? If he says zero tolerance and you're saying you're not doing zero tolerance?
Well, I think it's just a term. It's just a term. We're talking about proportionality, because zero tolerance is a very difficult place to come back from. If you do zero tolerance now, as later on, there's nowhere else to go. So we're not there yet. We are going to do this proportionately and fairly, and if things need shutting down, we're going to shut them down.
Thank you. And with regards to perhaps some of the businesses that your officers do visit, what sort of things are they seeing that maybe there has to be guidance issued on or enforcement in some cases?
To be honest, since we put this team together, we are not seeing anything. What we're getting is people calling and saying they have seen something, and then when we're getting down there, we're not finding it. So one of the things we probably will do, one of the tactics we will employ, is we're going to have some officers in plain clothes who are going to be going around and going into premises all across the island just to see what they can see. Because sometimes, it could be that people are suddenly getting their act together when they hear the police are coming in. And so we're going to have some officers working in plain clothes as well, just to see if people are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. Again, this is about compliance. It's not about tricking people. It's not about tripping people up. It's about gaining compliance for all our safeties.
Thank you very much. And I'm not sure if it's yourself or the Minister, but with regards to something that was mentioned, I think this week, about the fines that you touched on, included within that was wearing masks on the streets and in parks when people can't be 6 feet physically distanced. How do you enforce something like that?
We actually have provided mask guidelines on the government's website, but I think that even based on what you're saying, it comes again down to that personal responsibility as well. If I am this close and not being able to be at the 6 feet mark, then I should be wearing a mask. So when you say how we'll be able to enforce it, I think it's almost just as easy as what I just said to you. If I was closer than this with Mr. Weeks and I don't have on a mask at this time, then that would be in accordance to what the amendment to the law is meaning. I think it's as easy as that in terms of the understanding on what the law wants us to do.
Sure. And do you think, for example, then your COVID team will be patrolling some of the parks or, watching some of the areas perhaps in the city where people might congregate for these things?
No, I'm probably not going to get the COVID compliance team to do that, because I want them to concentrate on restaurants, bars and other places like that. But all the officers in the Bermuda Police Service are on board with this. So those powers are for everyone, and any officer who's driving a police car around, we see people not doing it, are going to be jumping out and talking to people. And if necessary, we're going to be reporting them for summons, and they're going to end up in court. So, that's what the power gives us, the regulations give us the power to do, is to report someone for summons, and they'll be eventually in court and have to face a fine of $500. We don't want to do that to everyone. We know everyone's tight with money right now, but you've got to do what you've got to do. Everyone has been warned that this is not a surprise to anybody that you've got to wear these things. You can buy them in every shop. There are boxes of them for sale, and whilst we all forget, we need to all start putting them in our pockets and keeping spare ones.
I appreciate that. Thank you both very much.
Thank you, Fiona. Greg, did you have any? No, none? Okay.
I just like to close on
Yes,
one
yes,
more.
please.
I just like to say that I hope you can hear me. That the Ministry of National Security's responsibility is we want to keep everyone safe. So it's less about enforcement, and it's more about you being safe, your families being safe, our communities being safe. And in that, we also want, we don't, one death was way too many for us. And so the fact that we've had 9 we're hopeful, and we pray for those families that are already going through, that we don't have to do this anymore. And so I would like for the public to look at it as less of so much of as an enforcement mechanism, but more of one that's keeping our communities safe and keeping our communities alive. We recognize that during this time of the year, we will generally be, it's festive, it's family, and we do recognize that. But let's try and do these things responsibly. Let's try and keep safe. Let's try and make sure we kind of reduce our COVID numbers if we can. And let's make sure that when we do get back to whatever normal is, that we're all here to be able to do it. So if that, I close my remarks today. Thank you, Bermuda.